Bunch.
Blended family Brady Bunch.
Can't you just feel the love?
All right, we're streaming. We're good to go, Hazen. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Mayor, members of the board, I want to welcome you to our first work session of the 2000 FY21 budget. Of course, as we've said before, special thanks goes to Becky Hawk, Assistant Town Manager, and Beth Blair, our Finance Director, and all department heads that have worked really hard while also battling the COVID-19, kind of a dual stressor, I would say. So what we plan on doing is using the presentation that we showed you guys about on the budget last week as the guide, and we'll kind of step through that, and we'll have the departments speak and kind of bring you guys highlights of the fiscal 20 budget. What I want to do is spend a little bit of time talking about the big picture. We got the latest budget information for April a couple days ago, well, actually today. And the budget continues to look really good. Now, as you'd expect, like property tax is what they would call a very static tax. And when the economy expands, it grows very slowly. And then when the economy shrinks, it also contracts very slowly. The recessions last time we saw just kind of building dry up. And the other thing, of course, in this case, we've been watching the sales tax figures, and the big dilemma that we struggle at, I don't know if it's North Carolina, every state in the United States, but what we are just now, well, technically we haven't even seen March figures officially. What Beth had to do is go to a state website, and they finally post the March figures. So we have just gotten the March figures, and they are ahead of what we budgeted. So that is, and you know, in theory, you have 1 week of the shutdown in there, so that's one of the reasons we say we see the, at least for this fiscal year, things to remain relatively stable. We're ahead on property tax right now by about tune of $265,000. We'll probably get maybe another 60. Well, I'd probably round it up to 3. We'll probably acquire about $300,000 above what we budgeted at the end of June in property tax, which if we see any dips in, let's say, sales tax, we think that's why, one of the reasons why the fiscal year 20 budget is whole. Now we'll continue to monitor that. We did look at some national statistics that looked at what happened in April, because basically the country was in shutdown in April, and these are national retail figures. So we've never looked at them before. I don't know how well they equate to, let's say, Mecklenburg County, but nationally we're down about 16%. And really the whole month we suffered through the COVID shutdown. Part of me I thought it would be higher than that. Here's the pressures on the 2021. And Lori, could we pull up the presentation and go to that slide? Oh, I guess it's Maureen's doing that. Yeah.
Hazen, can I ask about sales tax real quick?
Sure.
How they calculated that, do you know? I mean, does it include online sales? Because we don't have any major retailers distributing out of Matthews, so ours is probably going to be higher, or, you know, a greater percentage than 16%.
Well, that's a good question. But what happened, thankfully, is Congress finally passed a law that charges internet sales tax to internet purchases. So that is now being captured in the sales tax formula for Mecklenburg County, well, for Mecklenburg County and Matthews.
Is it up to the retailer though to record that? Because I know like when I file my taxes, it says, did you purchase something online? And you're supposed to self-report.
The way I now understand it, it's collected at the point of sale, let's say by, well, I don't know if it's Amazon or Joe's Computers or somebody like that, but it is now a state collected tax, like an item you'd buy at Harris Teeter or something like that. Okay, next, let's see, okay, here's the slide I was thinking about. So here's the pressures on the budget. We got the state retirement contributions, we got state health insurance, or employees' health insurance, workers' comp and property liability insurance. We are waiting on the bids. The bids could come in lower, but we are simply not comfortable giving you guys a number. Because one of the things they do is they'll give us a number and then they do an audit in August and you pay whatever the audit is. So we want to make sure we get as close to an audited number, not some kind of projected budget number. We think the vendors may be a little bit lazy on the front end. And then we got solid waste fees and of course salaries. Now, I do want to point out in the salaries that $381,000, that includes a 3% pool across the board, but that 3% pool accounts for about 325,000. And so the delta between the 325 and the 381, whatever that is, 55,000, represents the 1% market adjustment that the board gave in January. So, so those are an example of kind of the headwinds that the fiscal 21 budget is facing.
Hazen, solid waste fees are by contract, correct?
Contract, and then the CPI as of April, annual CPI. CJ, is that, do you remember the date that they calculate that from? Maybe it's February.
Sorry, having trouble unmuting. Yes, it's February that they calculate that.
Okay. So, you know, I've heard talk about the raises and like in this economy, raises and kind of what a difficult, whatever situation it is. There's a couple things I would want to lift up to the board. One of them is a couple years ago, the board adopted a plan that would make the town of Matthews employees at 60% of the market as compared to our competitors. I do think we're probably at the front end of doing a salary study that got us up to 60%, but my sense is some of our competitor towns have done salary studies in the meantime. And so I can't say we're still at 60%, but one of the things that this 3% raise would do would help us to be very competitive or at whatever, 60% as close as possible compared to our competitors. And what we've seen from the other towns, and the last survey we got, I think was the 4th of May, and the towns were at least 3% and a little higher. So we think that 3% is not too high and keeps us in line with the other folks. So I want to, you know, put that on the table. The other thing I would say, really, before we start getting into the hearing from the departments, we do have some options. I've heard you guys, well, I've heard concerns about, we've appropriated about $236,000 of the fund balance. That is not that much, but if the board is uncomfortable, we could do some things to buffer that a little bit. Let me give you some examples. One of the things we could do is wait on the audit. Now the audit, you know, obviously the fiscal year closes out at June 30. They do come in and do a preliminary audit sometime in September. And we will have, many times we'll have a working fund balance number. They'll say, well, it's not official because they haven't come to the board to make a presentation. But at the same time, I haven't seen that thing change much, if any, between when they tell us what they expect it to be and then what they tell you guys as a board. So what we could do is some of the capital improvements, we could set these aside or defer these and say, okay, we're going to defer these until we see what the audit says. One of the reasons I'm optimistic about the audit is that the revenues, believe it or not, look very strong for the end of this fiscal year. So I think what you'll see is strong returns in the fund balance. So I expect us to contribute to the fund balance. I don't have any projections right now. I think Beth's going to work on that, but we got to be very careful because so many of the things we deal with are unknown. And let me give you a good example. We get something called state shared collected taxes. Those include telecommunications and whatever the fee that electrical. And we've only gotten two. It comes quarterly. We've only gotten two of them. And you don't get the third one until the very end of June. So it is healthy to watch what happens at the end of the fiscal year when everything's in and you can see, but I do expect the fund balance to grow, and that may give the board a little bit of running time, or I guess runway to say, oh yeah, guess what? The fund balance is good. We could do things like, if we wanted to set aside, because one of the things we have in the budget is some hardening or security work at the police department, cameras downtown. Those are two examples. If we held those in abeyance till we got the audit, we could save about $180,000. We could, right now we're showing paving about $800,000, which is below what we need to be doing, by the way, but it is about $100,000 higher than what we've done kind of historically. And so you could trim like $50,000 out of that, and then we could find another 6,000, and we could eliminate the fund balance appropriation if that would make the board feel more comfortable.
Hazen, I have a question.
Yes, sir.
And I don't know how many people other than town staff and elected leaders are on this call, but I presume there's at least a few interested constituents and perhaps some reporters listening. So the question that I think that everybody wants to have answered is, why do you feel so confident that we're going to come in so strong on our tax revenue during this terrible time of COVID-19 when many of our businesses are closed down, et cetera?
Well, the first marker, well, we use the county as one of our benchmarks, and we talked to the county finance director, their budget director. They have an economist on staff, and the economist talked about, and their worst case scenario is a 10% decrease. And Beth and Becky, please chime in if I misspeak, but a 10% decrease in these last 3 months in sales tax. That's their projections. And what they talk about is, if you can visualize a U and the close down, which happened at the beginning of April, or really the last week in March, that's the bottom of the U. And the question is, how long is that going to last? Well, the assumptions they're making is as the governor opens up the businesses, the economy is going to climb back up the other end of that U. And we've got a month of shutdowns, and that's nationwide. That's a 16% decrease nationwide.
If I can chime in here for just a second, and talking with the county, I think another thing that was worth noting, the projections as they explained them were really taking into account the potential to absorb up to about a 20 to 22% decrease in sales tax during these worst few months, that bottom of the U that Hazen was referring to. And the working premise from the experts, from the economists, is that the economy will climb out of that U, and by the time we get to the end of next fiscal year, the end of FY21, we will have returned to the revenue levels for the entire year that we are seeing and expecting for this current year. So you would basically end up flat. So you've got a couple of really difficult months, but then you're going to recover so strongly that you really end up kind of right back where you started for this year. So, so in looking at that national sales trend of the 16% that came out the other day, Renee, to your question, that was a leading trend that they directed us towards. They said that that is a marker that they look at, and that historically Mecklenburg County has tracked quite closely with that leading trend number. And so they, when that leading trend number came out at the 16%, that is within that buffer of up to a 20 to 22% hit that they were expecting. So they are on track with their projections to be able to recover the way that they're hoping. So that's really how we've landed where we have with our projections.
I think that at the same time, oh, I'm sorry, Jeff.
I'm sorry, I was muted. My question is, what percentage of our income is ad valorem taxes? Because they're unaffected. The value of everybody's property is the same. What is a percentage of our ad valorem taxes off the top of your head, Hazen?
59%.
59.
So total budget is ad valorem taxes.
Okay, so that's certainly a stable income source. Sorry, Renee, I was going to let you go first, but I was unmuted. Go ahead.
I was going to say that's assuming that we come out of this and go back to normal. And I feel like on the side of caution, nobody really knows what the next 6 or 8 months are going to look like. Which, you know, for me, I'm carrying that concern forward as we discuss this budget. I listened in on a North Carolina League of Municipalities call, and their economist was expecting about 5 years of a recovery time. You know, so expecting us to climb out of this and be back at the top of the U before this budget year is even over seems to me maybe unrealistic.
That's a good point. One of the things I think's tough for the league and somebody that's talking about the whole state of North Carolina is, you know, rural parts of North Carolina have never come out of the recession of 2012. So to generalize for the whole state, you know, so we take the league's numbers with really a grain of salt because they'll give us advice about sales tax too. But then we'll say, okay, let's go closer to home like Mecklenburg County. One of the things they did, a couple of things they talked about is, you know, the stimulus payments haven't really kicked into the economy. You know, while we have high unemployment, there's also going to be unemployment benefits. So there's, I mean, and then you have all these stimulus packages. So I would say they remain, optimistic. I don't know if that's a word economists use, but they gave us concepts that made us feel better about kind of where we're headed. And I do think if the board wants to take a wait and see attitude, we can pull things out of the CIP, give you guys a budget with no fund balance increase, and then we could monitor it. We could monitor it. I would still strongly recommend raises for employees because I know there's companies out there that have had to cut back, but we don't make widgets, and our guys have been at the forefront of this thing the whole time. So it's like our guys have been plowing ahead, and you know, in my professional opinion, they do deserve an increase.
To piggyback off of what Renee is saying, I kind of drew out this U that you were talking about. There are absolutely no guarantees that U is going to come back. I mean, like as strong as it was. I mean, I've talked to people who think we could go into a recession after this, and I've talked to people who think we'll be better than ever. But there's no guarantee we'll be booming like we were in 2018, 2019. And I think it's a little bit too risky for my taste. I don't know how the board feels to be touching our fund balance right now until we know. I mean, is there a way we can push it off 6 months? Or I mean, I don't know what the time frame would look like, but I'd feel a lot more comfortable and I could stomach it a lot better if we waited on touching the fund balance.
And Commissioner Cool and other board members, that is something we could definitely do. When there's consensus, whatever the board at the end of this meeting, if that's one of the consensus items, we can go back and show you a plan to how we would carve out any fund balance appropriation with the ability to say, okay, guess what? I think we're okay. Let's fund some of these things that we carved out in May.
What did I miss in the fund balance discussion?
So there's, the fund balance appropriation is about $236,000. And what we could do is pull out the cameras. So you pull out the cameras at 80. You pull out the security work at the police department, that's 106. And you don't eliminate it, you're just pulling it out. So that's 186. That leaves you whatever, about $256,000. I would recommend taking 50 out of the paving budget, setting it aside, and then the other 6,500 we would just find through a variety of departments, and that's how we could hold in abeyance the fund balance appropriation.
Agent,
Appropriation, I'm a little behind or confused. You're talking about pulling from fund balance to make the budget?
Yes, sir, because our revenues, like some of these, that's $767,000 of financial headwinds versus really a flat revenue picture top to bottom, including growth in property tax and loss in sales tax and things like that.
All right.
To balance the budget. But if you guys said, look, let's just keep no appropriation fund balance, keep this 236 to the side, and then we'll revisit it. We could revisit it at mid-year. We could revisit it in October, whatever the pleasure of the board is.
Thank you.
Hazen, speaking for myself, I do not favor delaying hardening the police department or putting cameras up. As you and I discussed this afternoon, those cameras could help catch a murder or a child molester suspect or something like that. I think they're urgently important. We should put them up as soon as possible. I wouldn't want to delay that. I also think it's urgently important that we harden our police station so some terrorist couldn't go blow it up or whatever. So I think those are really important. Those aren't areas that I would necessarily choose to delay. Speaking for myself.
It's a fair point, Mayor. But the other, I guess, feedback to that comment is if you wanted to wait until we got the audit, right, which could be a couple months, you could revisit it. If still the majority of the board wanted to go with a balanced budget, we could revisit the two things you mentioned really as soon as we got preliminary numbers back from the auditor, which could be in September.
I wouldn't delay the hardening of the police department. I mean, maybe the cameras, but of those two, I feel like the police department needs to be a top priority.
I agree.
Mr. Mayor, I'm listening to what everybody's saying, and I'm in general agreement. I just believe that, we don't have any idea of what's going to happen over the next 3-4 months. And I'm concerned, my main concern is I want to be sure that we can keep everybody employed, keep everybody getting benefits. I'm not as much concerned about increasing things right now. I mean, I'm sitting here looking at how the numbers are going up every week by, millions on people that are unemployed, and we're assuming that everything's going to be rosy. I just think it's overly optimistic. I hope everybody's right, but I want to see some sign of what's going to happen before I, want to go spending fund balance or giving a bunch of raises. Now, I'm more than anything, I want to see that all of our people are paid well and rewarded for doing good work. And if everything goes the way that we hope that they do, and things come up all roses, I would like to see, isn't there some way that we can give like bonuses or delayed compensation in some way to see what's coming, as opposed to, I'm just, like I said, I want to prepare for the absolute worst and hope for the best. But I think that people are painting too rosy of pictures for political purposes, and it scares me because I don't think we're getting accurate information, and it worries me.
I want to be clear on my comment. I was not suggesting that we forge ahead with our current budget and necessarily spend the fund balance. I was just saying that hardening the police department location and putting up the cameras would not be places that I would choose to cut. I think we need, if we're going to cut somewhere else. Not sure where yet. That's why we're having this workshop. But I think those two projects are pretty important and should be done as soon as possible.
And I agree with Dave, and have talked with Pastor Whitley about, there are people that are making less than living wages in Matthews. Maybe that's where we concentrate the raises right now. But again, I feel like this is an overly optimistic projection. I'm not sure why Mecklenburg County feels so secure in their numbers when, I hear that the rest of the country is expecting a recession. So maybe we aren't giving raises to people who are comfortably within their pay schedule, but look at some of the lower earning members of staff who are on the front lines doing the work, and members of public works and our policemen and our fire department. And somehow, then you are rewarding hard work for those people on the front lines. And that's not to say that I believe administration isn't doing a wonderful job. I think that you all deserve to be rewarded. At the same time, our household's making less than half of what we normally do. We're all pulling back and, and pinching pennies, and feel like we should approach this budget in that same way.
I support that.
So one of the options the board has, that's certainly one of the options. The other option the board could do is hold off on raises, do like an administrative hold for the first quarter to see, okay, our sales tax coming back. I mean, I would not use sales tax as the primary indicator. That's 15% of our revenue. So just keep everything, in context. If we went down 20% sales tax, it's $600,000 on a $25 million budget, as an example. But we can certainly hold, just like, okay, let's put it over here in administrative hold. Let's see what happens. Let's let the data come in. There is no, all this is crystal ball to some extent. And then the thing that I find most frustrating is, we're looking at, most of the time we're looking at 45-day-old sales tax information. Now we found an in to find something that's only 15 days old, but then it's aggregated for the whole country and not just Mecklenburg County.
Well, what if we had a Hurricane Hugo, or instead of a very minor tornado that tore down 51, we have a Category 5 tornado come through the town of Matthews and hit the downtown area and our commercial areas and homes. I'm just worried about dipping into the fund balance. I'm spending money that we don't have, acting like we're not in a pandemic and ignoring what's going on in the rest of the country. It just doesn't make sense to me.
Well, I hear you, and I appreciate what you're saying, Commissioner Bland, but I would not say we're ignoring the other things. I mean, we're getting best information that we have. And the budget has really been, I mean, at some point we'll get the department heads to talk about their budgets and kind of what's not in there, but there's a lot that is not in the budget that's already been cut out. And, I expect, but furloughing employees, we didn't do it in recession, and we don't plan on doing it now. I do think the employees like fire, those guys work 2,700 hours a year. So if you do the math, it can come below $15 an hour. But just remember, at times they do have the opportunity, because they work a 24-hour shift, that they can get rest during the night. That's not always the case, but they get paid during some downtime as well. So I think it can be a little misrepresentation to think firefighters are not getting paid a livable wage.
I apologize because I can't see everybody, but I understand Commissioner Miller needs to make a comment or would like to make a comment.
Thank you. Thank you. Commissioner Bland, you're making a comment about worrying if there's a hurricane or a tornado or a weather event and spending money that we don't have. However, our fund balance is money we do have. We've brought it up to 34%, or I guess that'd be 4 months spending to run our community, no matter what. We've been below that during the recession, between 2008 and 2011, and we've brought it back, but we used it wisely during the recession. And I think this would be another opportunity. I'm not voting in support or whatever. I just don't want to worry about the future when we're having problems with the present. And our fund balance is money that we do have now, period. And at 34%, 4 months spending, even if we went broke, I feel comfortable utilizing that for what it's worth.
I could just add a comment. I've spoken to, and Larry, I'll call on you in just a moment, please. I've spoken to most of the commissioners one-on-one or heard your opinions, and I believe there is a consensus of this board to not dip into the fund balance at this time. I believe that's correct. We haven't heard from you, Commissioner Urban or Commissioner Whitley, but I believe that's what I'm hearing. So that's, I think, the direction we should take.
Okay.
Commissioner Whitley, would you like to say something?
Yeah, put the figures back on the board, Hazen, for the budget.
So if you want to make a comment, just chime in because I can't see you when we're doing in presentation mode. So
Yeah. Can you see me now?
Yes, sir. Maureen, can you do
Hey,
that?
yeah, put those numbers back. It was $767,000 total. That right?
Yes, sir.
And I think the only thing we're talking about is the salaries. Are we checked off? Are we good on all the rest? Is that consensus with the whole board? All the other stuff, insurance and workman's comp, health insurance, retirement, the solid waste. I think you said that's coming in a little later for get a base on it. So are the only heartaches we're having is with this increase in salaries and fully funded position?
The other numbers are static, right? We
They're
can't.
set.
No, if I can just clarify, everything on this page is static. That increase in base salaries and fully funding positions was for positions that were added partway through the year last year that now have fully funding in this budget. And then that 1% increase that we did, the pay increase, the merit increase that we had last year. So everything on this page is completely baked in, was already absorbed into the budget. The merit pool, the 3% merit pool, is a completely separate $325,000 over and above this. It was not included on this because it is, of course, the board's discretion whether or not to fund that. So I just want to make sure that the board is clear that we're really talking about apples and oranges.
All right, so is 76 78,000 the actual number, or is there another 300 with the 3% added to that? Am I, just so I can be clear?
The existing budget has already absorbed this
Okay,
$768,000 in set increases. So the 325 is separate.
okay, I got you. All right, so out of the 325, how much were you talking about taking out of fund balance, Hazen?
$236,000.
200, how much again?
236,000.
Okay, which will leave $89,000 in the fund balance if we fully funded the whole thing. All right, so I heard what the mayor said, and I'm waiting because I look at where we are, and I look at Matthews, and I know Hazen, you and I talked about this. Matthews has been real conservative for many years in making sure that we always have enough money in times of crisis. And now I know that a lot of people are out of work and a lot of people are hurting, but now I am looking at our police department, our fire department, and what sacrificing and public work to be included in it, and what they have done in these crises, especially with the hurricane that came through here, along with them being on the front line. They kept working when all of us was in place so that we could be safe. And I've seen them all out. I've seen them come in the community and go where people thought they had this corona, but they still wore the mask. I've seen them come in my community and go into houses and make sure, but they on the front line. Now, I look at things a little bit different. I don't look and see if the glass is half empty. I think it's half full, and I think we got an opportunity when we look at what if, but if you worry about what if, knowing that what we have now, and I think Jeff Miller said it right, we got money on hand, but I got to err on the side of thinking that what you see are the analysts telling us that the latter part, and I think we are going to bounce back. The latter part is going to rebound, even if we came out at the end of this year even, then we're good. But I'm pretty sure, certain by then we'll have a vaccine, and I was listening to the news, a vaccine that will help even near the end of the year, first of next year, which I would think would get us back on track. So, I'm in favor of giving them a raise and to make sure there's an efficient, because they earned it, they worked it because they're on the front line. And I know my people who stayed over at my church in the daycare, they on the front line and they earned it. They stayed over. Every one of my teachers volunteered to work through this crisis so we can keep those babies of nurses and teachers so that they can do their job. And I think they deserve a little bit more than those people who didn't do that. I am a police officer, and I believe in the police and the fire, and I know the job they've done for too many years. This town of Matthews have been short, especially with the fire department, the police department. And I heard Chief has given me some plans that he wanted and make things better for the police department. I believe in that. But I think we got to give an opportunity to make that come to fruition as long as with the fire department. Now I come back to the fire department again, and I am in favor of the fire department because I live in part of the town that we do not have protection. That's clear. And y'all don't live over here, I do. I think John Urban, you in that area as well too. So whatever we can do we can get from here to the end of the year, I'm in favor of making that work. And I think the numbers crunch. I crunch the numbers, and I know y'all do too. That's why I looked at the budget. That's why I want to know this, the number that we're not talking about a whole lot of money. And I know people, Matthews, we want to be the best. I want to be the best. I want to be the best for our police department. I don't want everybody around us to give their people incentive for going through this crisis. And we lose people when they say, well, Mint Hill, Pineville, Huntersville, and whatever else was giving our department increases during this time and rewarding them for being on the front line. I want Matthews to be one of the front leaders in that. not want to be in the security, step out on faith. And that's my 2 cents. I waited patiently to hear everybody else's. But Mayor, that's my consent. Now, if we can cut some things out, I don't have a problem cutting some things out, but I don't want it to be on the police and the fire department and the public works. I don't want that.
I would like to clarify something. I don't think any of the commissioners don't think, I think we think that they deserve the raises. We have great employees, we have great staff. It's not that they don't deserve it. It's just, I don't want to dip into the fund balance. If we can figure a way to, still give the raises and not dip into the fund balance, sounds great. Let's do it. But I, in no way was I insinuating that they didn't deserve it. I just wanted to clarify that.
Ken, are you willing to look at that and put it off for maybe 4 months and then revisit again if things start turning around?
Well, that's what I originally said is let's see, maybe wait a quarter or wait 6 months. I don't know. Again, it's whatever the board decides, but wait and see what happens. I mean, we just don't know that we're going to come back as strong as we were. I hope we do. It'd be great if we are, as great as, financially stable as we were last year, but we just don't know. And I think it's just too big of a risk for the town to take right now. I mean, we got to plan for the future too. It's great to spend money now, but we got to plan for the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years.
All right, let's give the leaders of each department the opportunity to present their budget. But before we do that, Commissioner Urban, do you have any comments before we start on that?
Well, I appreciate everybody's comments this evening. I will stand by what I had mentioned the last meeting, where I felt specifically last meeting that raises for commissioners and for staff were inappropriate at this point in time. As a homeowner, as a business owner, you got to look at your piggy bank. And the first thing you do is you shelter in place very quickly with your piggy bank and begin to sort of see what is going to be happening out there. UWV, hockey stick, whatever the call might be. I could see coming back around in January 1 of 2021 and relooking at these things. But the reality is, if the economy doesn't come back as strongly as people anticipate it to come back, it could affect us in some form or fashion. I think the fact that staff is held whole, they all have their jobs, which is a far cry from where the rest of the sector is or the population is. We have the luxury of some benefit of lower fuel prices and things like that. So I don't think this is a situation where they all do a great job. I get it, but right now, even in my business, you're sitting here going, you need to preserve cash. You have to preserve equity at the moment. And then when you see some daylight and an opportunity to invest it, that's what you do. And so I think if we can pull back and we hold as long as we can, a reasonable amount of time, then we can allocate the funds again as we see fit. I think the hardening makes a lot of sense to the police department, but I'd hate to take things even out of the $50,000 out of paving, because the fact is that $50,000 puts money into a paver's coffers, which puts money into an employee's coffers. And I think right now we need to be looking at those businesses and those citizens that would benefit from some of our putting money into the system from that standpoint. But I still stand by that I'm not apt to want to rob the fund balance at this moment, not giving pay raises and things like that, being extremely, extremely cautious. We have some time. We're still at the bottom here, and we're talking about doing things that we normally wouldn't be doing until we positively see the light of day. And I think it's going to be a while before things turn around. I think it's going to be bumpy over the next few months with the stay at home and the opening up, because frankly, let's take sales tax and hotel motel. Well, if you can only open up to 20% capacity and then a 50% capacity, most businesses, 1 out of 3, will probably go out of business. So they're going to be completely off the dole 6 months from now. So I think we have to realize that it's not all going to come back the way it was, and it's going to take some time. So I tend to sort of see Hazen or Becky's 1 year and Renee's 5 years. I think there's a compromise position in there realistically, because there are just some sectors in this world that cannot return to full capacity based on what we're seeing right now. And I just think it's just good showmanship to lead in this community to saying, we're going to cinch up our belts tight as we can possibly be, and we'll continue to monitor the situation, and then come down the road, we'll loosen our belts again and do exactly like John Doe does in the town of Matthews.
I have a question.
I have a question too.
Thank you. When is the town of Matthews planning to open up restaurants and food service with social distancing and courtyards and seating 6 feet away and wearing masks?
So of course, we're under the governor's order. And I have not seen, I was trying to look, I got like 6 bullet points for all of phase 2. Let me see. Oh, it does say allow a limited openings of restaurants, bars, fitness centers, personal care services, and other businesses that follow safety protocols, including the potential need for reduced capacity. So that's all it says.
Very vague.
On what date?
May 9th,
29.
Friday.
What?
That's if the governor has to, whatever, say yes to that. And on his press conference, they sound like they're optimistic about the trends, but I didn't hear him. I didn't listen to the whole thing, but I didn't hear him say, we're going to do it. It's just a matter of time. I think a lot of people think we're going to go to phase 2 on Friday.
Friday is the what's the date? May what?
22nd.
22nd.
But North Carolina just had its highest increase in cases within the past week. So, I don't know, something like, is it 600 or 800 new cases in one day? And part of that phase 2 is dependent upon the numbers consistently being stable or going down.
The numbers of new cases, or the numbers of deaths, or the numbers of hospitalizations?
Then I just saw the number of new cases.
There's 4 metrics, and I think you named 3 of them, Jeff.
I think we, from what I had said, saw today is we've met 3 of the 4 metrics so far.
Of what, Mr. McCool?
All of them except for the trending of new cases is all
Phase 2, Jeff. Phase 2.
So
Yeah,
they
thank you. And my point is, if you're testing twice, 3 times as many people, new cases will be on the rise, but hospitalizations, deaths, intubations, and other things, I don't know what the metrics are because I've been a little bit busy, but I'm encouraged if our town can open up on Friday with social distancing, because I'm for the small businessman.
Well, it is difficult to wear a mask in a restaurant if you're eating.
It's just as easy to buy clothing at Belk as it is at Walmart.
Don't disagree.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Commissioner Whitley, go ahead. Yes, sir.
I got a statement, not so much of a question. Now, I've read some texts that some civilians that sent in about commissioners getting a pay raise. That's not a pay raise, and I want to make that clear. All you did was took our technology allowance and put it into our salary. It's not that's something we getting. We already had that. We just moved it from one place to the other. So I want to make it clear. The commissioners were not getting a pay raise. That was not a pay raise. And I want that to be clear to people who are listening and to the board here too. So all the thing you were moving is a technical allowance that we got $1,800 a year over into our salary rather than keeping that at the end of the year that you filed for.
Somebody mentioned Pineville and Mint Hill. So the raises that, and I am not going to let this go with no, out of all respect, but because our employees are our key, we got to keep those employees. And Pineville is talking about a 3% merit, a 2% COLA, and this came from their mayor to our mayor. Mint Hill's talking about between a 3 and 4% COLA and a 2.5% merit. Those are our competitors.
But
I've talked to Huntersville and Pineville, and they're, Huntersville is certain they'll do some sort of raise, but they're not sure what that looks like. And Pineville is not sure they'll do a raise. So while it's important to recognize, maybe then we look at what Mint Hill staff is making and what our staff is making and compare those numbers, or Pineville's numbers. I'm not sure if the mayors are saying one thing, it's not certain they're reflective of what their boards are thinking.
It's a fair point, but I guess what I'm trying to say is it's not coming from the managers. Like the managers that in this economy, it's like, we hear you, manager. What's your board say? There's another data point when it's coming from the mayors, but again, it's not a majority of the board.
Right, and what I've heard is that, that's not necessarily reflective, that there hasn't been a public discussion among the boards about whether they will approve an increase or not.
And I'm sure they're saying as well, Matthews is proposing, the 3% increase too. So everyone is kind of pointing at each other and none of them could pass. And, you just don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I shared the 3% number with my fellow mayors based on the recommendation of you, Hazen, and Becky. So without having necessarily gone through this board saying that's what we're going to do. I don't think I have a problem with holding off on giving the raise and seeing how things turn out later in the year. That'd be a little more conservative approach.
I'd like to talk about it again in January.
Makes
Why
sense.
we gotta wait? Why we want to wait to January? Can't we talk about that in October? You should see whether we head in there by October. Why wait to January? Oh, 6 months.
There's no certainty that there won't be, that we won't be back in isolation in another 4 months. There's just.
But you can have an idea. You can see where the numbers are by October. You can read that.
I don't feel comfortable with what I've heard. I don't feel confident that that's going to be the case. I mean, I do think we need to talk about livable wages, and obviously that's a bigger discussion, and everybody defines that differently. But right now, all we know about isolation and opening back up is speculation, and not really, the US isn't necessarily following international trends, I guess.
And I think Renee brings up a good point. This is all speculation. There's no, hard and fast facts that are absolutely true. We're running on speculation at this point, and that's why I kind of want to be conservative of it, because when you run only on speculation, that's a dangerous game to play.
Let me just chime in. I mean, the bottom line is, if for some reason this economy bounces on a V, and for some reason, and we decide to delay till January 1, we can always come back to the table and say, dodge the bullet, we're out of the gate, let's go ahead and revisit these things. But isn't it the better part to be more prudent at this stage in the game and have that latitude, as opposed to releasing money and doing some things and realizing we take another bound in the wrong direction? Or just the reality is that, JCPenney's has gone bankrupt. It's a player in the town of Matthews. What about all the support businesses that support JCPenney's that are in Matthews? We don't know what the consequences are right now on our infrastructure for the next 3 or 4 months. We're going to have a better signal in 3 or 4 months where things are trending, maybe in October, but I don't see why January isn't a good mechanism to target in terms of this conversation.
I mean,
I concur with you, John. My only thing is that I think from May to October, weekly they're now working on a vaccine, and if they got pretty good idea that the vaccine is going to be available come January or the first early part of 2021, then people are going to take that vaccine, and the economy is going to go back. But that's my and I concur as a business person as well too. You need to be cautious and save some money, but at the same time, you got to take care of the people who take care of us. And that's my number one concern.
Hold on. I don't hear any of the scientists, I mean, the real scientists saying that we're going to be having a vaccine that's going to be, that they're not going to bet the farm on that. You know, that you can't bet everything on the fact that they're going to do something that they've never done before. It just doesn't make sense to me to bet the farm on the fact that, oh, everything's going to be rosy in a few months and we'll be back to normal, so let's bet the farm on it. That just doesn't make sense to me.
And David, there is a last scientist was out, and I watched it today. There is a vaccine that they have proven on 100 people that can make antibody, and it looks very promising. And they're moving forward with now going forward, and they're very hopeful. Now they didn't, like you say, they didn't bet the farm on it, but they're very hopeful by the first of the year they will have a vaccine that will be very, very well 99% for this virus.
That's 7 months off. There's 4 billion people on this planet. You can't get that out. It's going to be, as just like they've said from the beginning, 18 months if everything goes perfect.
I got you.
And I've never ever experienced anything in my lifetime that's gone completely perfect, that has as many moving parts as this has got.
I got it. I'm concurring with you.
Let me see here the consensus. So the consensus I'm hearing is no fund balance appropriation. So that's one thing we're hearing. And then the second thing is, while some people are saying no raises, it seems like the consensus is somewhere in the 6 to 9 month, or 3 from now, or from July 1st, 3 to 6 months, a relook at raises. Is that a fair summation, or how, put a finer point on that?
I think
I think it is.
I think most of us have said January 1.
yeah, I concur.
Jason, I would like to say that the 3% pool represents about $325,000, correct?
Yes, sir.
Can you cut $325,000 from someplace else in this current budget?
Well, I mean, I've been hamstrung a little bit. Yeah, we could put the cameras, we could delay the cameras, we could delay the police department work. We could bring the paving back down to normal levels at 700,000. And there's $300,000 right there.
What about without because I don't want to take away the cameras or the police department. So
Guess what? We got a 28-cent tax rate. That's low for a city that loves bells and whistles.
You got a pencil sharpener in your office?
Raising taxes now is better optics than giving employees raises.
Say it again. Say it again, Renee.
Giving a tax increase so that we can continue to give employees raises is going to go over.
Oh,
yeah, there's no way that's happening.
You know, one of the interesting things about employees, and the board's been good historically about this, is, you know, good police officers sneak away, they dribble away if they're not treated fairly. And then you get inexperienced folks, don't really know what they're doing. Before you know it, you get yourself in a pickle. And we've been able to avoid that through, I think, good leadership and good employees. So I'm not saying y'all are insensitive to that. You're juggling a whole bunch of what ifs in this, but
And what do the numbers look like if we're giving the lowest paid police officers a raise, the lowest paid public works employees a raise, and the lowest paid fire and EMS workers a raise, and holding everybody else until January. What does that look like?
We could do the numbers. I think the tough part is like, where do you draw the line? Where's the bright line, and who wins and who lose? You know, like, oh, I just make $500 too much and I get 1%, or I don't know. I mean, we're open to that. I don't know how it works practically. I think in order really to go down that, I think it'd be more important, like if the board's saying, look, it raises in January, well, that saves $160,000, right? So that's 2/3 of the funding, the fund balance appropriation. So then we'll find another 80 plus or minus.
What would be the figure if we only did a 2.25 pay increase, percent? I mean, you take away, I mean, is that a possibility?
Sure. I mean, because 1% is about $87,000. So are you saying from July 1 or January 1? January. So, whatever that is, 160, maybe $200,000, less $180,000, $190,000.
That gets you closer to not touch. I mean,
but 1% for somebody who's making $100,000 is a lot different than 1% for somebody who's making $40,000. I mean, for me, I feel like it's important that we get those people who are making the lowest in Matthews, and I don't know what that threshold is, and maybe that's comparing, I think that, getting the most recent North Carolina League of Municipalities survey and seeing where we're inadequate in pay across the board is. I mean, I've looked at some of the numbers for some of the higher salaries, and I think we're comfortably within that realm. But if we're worried about losing police officers for pay, then certainly our lowest paid police officers would be my biggest priority.
I agree.
I concur.
I'd just like to make a comment here, and I've shared this comment with a few of you, including town manager. This is my fourth term as an elected official in Matthews, and it's a little bit surprising, perhaps, and I think probably surprising to some of our constituents, that this is perhaps the most conservative board that I've served on, and maybe for you as well, John, who's been on another board besides me, and Jeff's been on a few more besides that. But it's interesting. It certainly matches my style. I'm very fiscally conservative, and so I'm happy to see it. But this is a very cautious board, Hazen, and we're just trying to tread very carefully, I believe, and it's reflected in everybody's comments, I believe.
You should clarify that we're the most fiscally conservative.
Fiscally conservative, sure. That's what I meant, but I think that might be a surprise to some, but this motley group of folks that we've got together on this board as a whole are pretty doggone fiscally conservative and cautious. And
did the bulk of the town employees not just get a lucky strike bonus from the federal government? Like a lot of citizens got a $1,200. You're nodding your head. No,
our guys were working.
What?
Our guys worked.
$1,200 was handed off to everybody that made less than $100,000.
Somebody speak up. I don't know. I had nobody said anything to me about that.
Yes.
I mean, families with two children were getting $3,000, whether they working or not, which in my opinion, if you weren't working, you needed a hell of a lot more than the person making $75,000 getting the money as well. So, I mean, there was a pop there. I just think this is just a bad taste with the citizens in this town of Matthews if we can't just hold up 6 months to have this conversation a little bit further. And the fact is, I'm sure I'm going to get an earful of people saying, well, you already got money from the federal government. I mean, did our town employees exempt from that, or did they not get the money?
That's two different things. That's two different things,
It's
John.
not two different things. It's $1,200.
It is. That's the $1,200 was for the cause of the virus. That wasn't us giving them a raise. That came across for everybody that made, like you say, less than $150,000.
Well, it's still more money than they have today.
It always is, but you can't compare the government giving everybody, not just Matthew, the whole country, $1,200 a person because of this virus. Now that's the difference. Now, if the virus were not here, they wouldn't have got that. None of us would have got it, and some of us still ain't got it.
Well, then it'd be a different conversation, but some people did get it. I mean, you know, mind you, the fact is that town employees also have 2 retirement accounts. So there's give and take on all these things. But by God, I'm sitting here struggling to keep 7 families employed in my office. I got to deal with other architects and contractors out there, and not one single one of them saying, yeah, let's give raises. And some of these people are on the front lines too. I get it. But at this point in time, it needs to be a much more conservative approach.
I agree. If you want to do to 6 months, I concur with that, but I just don't want to wipe it off the table.
I didn't say wipe it off the table. We have never wiped off a pay raise off the table. We've been very considerate. I mean, we had one heck of a year for the fire department and one heck of a year for the police department in the last 4 years. And,
yes,
you know, it seems to be that we try and do the best we can with what we have.
Commissioner Miller.
Thank you. I just have 2 little sentences. When the government shuts down millions of private businesses, but doesn't lay off a single government employee, it's not about your health. When this government tells you it's too dangerous to get treated by a doctor or a chiropractor or a physical therapist, yet a liquor store is essential, it's not about your health. We can wear masks, we can protect ourselves, we can use our own judgment, and we don't need the government to tell us how to do it.
Okay, but where do you stand on the pay raise, Jeff?
January.
Hazen, I believe the consensus is that we want to hold off on raises till January.
Okay, and then also no appropriation from the fund balance, right? Those are the 2 takeaways from this discussion. Understood.
Can we talk
So-
about
so-
comparing the different wages in January, or can we do that before then so that going into January, we can have a better perspective?
I'd love to see a breakdown.
I'm sorry, what's the request again?
Well, I know that we have the MAPS study, but I'd also like to see the North Carolina League of Municipalities study comparing similar towns with similar budgets and towns with similar populations, and what police and fire and what our lowest wage earners make specifically, but across the board would be better. And you know, it doesn't necessarily need to be you guys breaking it down. If you want to get the studies to me, then I can look at them, and anybody else that's interested.
We can do that. It's easy.
I'd like to ask a question to the elected officials here. If we reconvene in January and we discover that everything has come up roses and that we have far exceeded our income way more than we expected, would you consider somehow giving back pay equivalent to the raise that we would have given now to the employees?
Absolutely.
If the money was available, if we had it and everything was great, so that, you know,
At all.
still showing that we greatly value our employees and we would consider that, but we're only going to do that if we have the income that we expect that can cover it. Does anybody have any comment on that?
I didn't look at it specifically, but is there still longevity pay? And is that something that we need to talk about too?
There is longevity pay in the budget.
And how many other towns provide longevity pay?
We did, anybody got that off the top of our head? We did that in the study.
It's out of 12, I think 7, including us, still did. It was just over the 50% mark of those that we compared.
What were the comparisons? Proximity or?
Proximity, our closest competitors in terms of recruiting employees in this area. The ranges for longevity vary greatly from a max of a few $100s regardless of service to many multiples of what we pay in longevity pay.
Can you send those town numbers to us?
Sure, yeah, we had prepared that. It was probably 18 months ago or so, but we've got that available. We can send that out.
And if it's still relevant, I mean, I guess we won't know until July, but which towns are going to continue that at this time?
Yeah, it's a practice that's hard to stop once you've started, but I'm not necessarily a fan of giving folks a bonus based on length of service.
I remember
rather
it came up.
rather than merit.
It came up last year in the budget discussion. I remember hearing you guys talk about it. So
It's a difficult thing to stop once you've started, and we've got a long history, I think, of doing it here. So
Yeah, now I'm a man of longevity. I think you work hard and work a long time, and if you make good and the state is doing good, I think you deserve your longevity pay. I'm gonna holler for all the firemen and police, whoever get longevity. I'm hollering for y'all tonight. You keep that longevity in there. You burn it with your years of service.
We did also, just an additional point of clarification, we did add a caveat in the updated personnel policy that you have to be at least meeting expectations in your last performance in order to meet it. So it has moved it away from a little bit more of a guarantee to you have to earn it.
Is there a vehicle or a mechanism in the system that allows you to just continue that for all new hires, or is it a one-size-fits-all situation?
It's discretion of the board. You do not have to keep it. It represents probably about 1% of salaries. But you could, that's typical. It's not uncommon for new hires to do what you're talking about, to ease something out and say, okay, new hires. It does create two classes of employees. I know in the city of Charlotte, they did that with health insurance, and you had the new guard, young guard, and the old guard, and they were not being treated equally.
But maybe that's something that's, I mean, if you're using longevity pay to reward for merit, then maybe that's worked into the merit pay, instead of longevity necessarily.
Where it does hit employees differently though is, take a $40,000 a year employee who's able to earn $500 as essentially a bonus payout right before Christmas. That's what a lot of our employees are using to fund Christmas for their kids. And so it hits their pay differently as opposed to a 3% pay increase on a $40,000 salary. That's at the end of the day, really a couple dollars a paycheck that, they're grateful to have, but it's not able to offset their budget quite the same way that the longevity pay is. So they're really, just kind of different ways to approach it. And obviously employees like both, but we had looked at maybe rolling it into merit and funding merit higher, but it can have a disparate impact on employees who would actually lose pay because they've been with us for so long, and the increased merit pool wouldn't make up for that.
Mm-hmm.
So Hazen, if to move this meeting forward, if we take the pay increase off the table until January 1st, that saves about $160,000. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
So what is the remaining shortfall without touching the fund balance?
So we need another $80,000 without touching the fund balance. That's something we could look into internally.
Yeah, so, and I think we got general consensus that we would consider making up the raise that would have been perhaps given now in January if the income merits it.
Jason, if you, looking through my list of questions I forwarded you this morning, I don't know if you got a chance to look through it or not, but did you see any dollars and cents there?
we don't have the workers' comp numbers back. I don't want to be premature and try to be overly optimistic. The library, I'm in discussions with the library. I had an email exchange today. I proposed to them $3 a square foot, which could multiply by 14,000. It's like $45,000 a year. The library said that's too high. That $3 a square foot is only applicable if you're doing inside maintenance. You know, that's not my wheelhouse. But
it's not inside maintenance. It's common area.
Not inside maintenance.
It's outside of the interior.
This is what he's, you know, maybe it's a negotiating tool, but
stick Jeff after him.
well, and the second component of that is there is things we've done to this building to the tune of $188,000.
Yes.
Their share of the work. So our pitch to them is, look, you guys need to pay us back for that work. And if you want to pay us over 5 years or 7 years, that's not as important as long as we get our money back. And then there needs to be a fund going forward. For instance, when we repave or repaint or re-roof, and that equals about $1.10 a square foot. So he hasn't pushed back. I haven't heard his feedback on either of those two things, but we are going to talk about this Thursday. So maybe there may be money there. But again, I don't, you know, I want to be careful,
Right.
budgeting the number that we can't make or whatever, but those are a couple examples of
I got you.
sources of funds, revenue.
I just, in going through it, I was just sort of surprised at some things. I'm surprised that like electricity costs were going up, and I thought we had converted all to LED. I was expecting to see some savings and things like that. Maybe we haven't gone enough cycles to make that happen, but numbers keep going up, but yet we're doing things and spending money to bring them down, and I hadn't seen that yet.
I know, it's frustrating for us too. We did
Commissioner Miller.
town hall.
Thank you. Hazen, we need to put this library lease issue to bed. It's been 3 years since before Paul Bailey was mayor that we were debating what the worth was the building paid off? Do they pay their fair share of a common maintenance fee or a rent or a lease or whatever it is? We agree there are expenses with parking lot, with roof, with pillars, with stairways, with a lot of different things. We need to put this to bed. And if that makes up the shortfall, so be it.
Yeah, and I'm with you 100%. The library the contract, the lease that was originally done, this was not contemplated for whatever reason 20 years ago. They're building a new library over at Pineville. All these kind of things are now accounted for in the initial lease. So we're working on it. It is a two-way street though. I just can't dictate to them, here's what you're going to do, take it or leave it. So there is some negotiation that goes on.
3 years.
I understand.
Needs to come to an end. And if you want me to attend the meeting, I will.
Nip it in the bud. Nip it in the
I have
bud.
one bullet in my pocket.
So Hazen, is it your preference then, instead of having your department heads go through their budget, for you guys just to work internally and try to carve out this extra 80,000, or does Chief Pennington want to volunteer 80,000 real quick?
We will work on it internally. Sorry, Mayor, are you saying, do you want us to still go through the budgets, or what's
your preference? You said you wanted to work on it internally. Is that what you prefer to do, or I think you've got some direction from the board?
You know what, it's a great question, Mayor, and I do think it's been a hard discussion, 90 minutes or whatever we're at, 80 minutes, a hard discussion. But
Yeah.
I did want to lift up to the board that there are things that are not in this budget. And I know we're in a pandemic, but we're not going to be in a pandemic forever. And right, we always want to be great. And, it's like, how are we going to be great? And I do think it's got to be somewhere on your radar now. If we want to do a mini conference, in October, we've done those before, but I do think, we were talking about bond referendums. Now, guess what? This thing takes those things off the table, but that doesn't eliminate the need for some of these things that this board wants to do. And maybe it's a planning, maybe it's a mini conference in the fall that, you know, comprehensive plan for the town. Jay, how old is ours? 10 years old? Our comp plan?
Yeah, 2012. So if we were to get started now, you know, we'd be 12 to 18 months to put the plan together and enact it. So, you know, 10 years, well, really 7 to 10 years is a good rule of thumb.
Hey, Hayes,
Yes, sir.
Hazen,
Yes, sir.
I heard you mention about the bond referendum. Why is it off the table?
You're kidding me, right?
No, I'm not kidding. No, I'm not kidding.
Larry,
No, I'm not.
no one's going to be looking for a tax increase, and that's what a bond is. I mean, it would just be foolhardy. I'm still supportive of a bond. I think we prepare for one. We have extra time now, and we target, you know, in the next year or so. But I think if you came off the table right now and said we're going to put something on the table for a bond in November, I think we'd be laughed off this board.
But it's not going to come until 2021.
Well, I think, you know, we're talking about everything we talked about at the planning conference. That's kind of scrapped when COVID-19 came. I mean, you're a month or a couple months later. I mean,
we haven't even revisited all the things y'all talked about. But
exactly.
Commissioner Whitley, what I'd say is timing is everything, right?
I understand.
And you know what? If it's not, the timing's not in November of 20, it's going to come. Maybe it's 21.
I just asked you a question.
I have a quick question too. And it's probably pretty elementary since I'm new to this budget process. But like the community center, I know that we're still paying off the roof on that. Where does, I feel like there are going to be repairs that come up for the community center over the next year. Walking my kids to school, I noticed that a lot of the windows were rotting out. Where does that fall on the budget? That's going to be a big project and it's going to cost a lot. Where are we, you know, how does that fall into place?
Tourism funds, that's community center is all funded through tourism funds, but tourism funds is taking a hit, but we do have fund balance. But, you know, remember, we're doing a lot of things because of the RMC, but, you know, those have been vetted and we're okay with that. And then we've strung out the payments. So, you know, it's, but we don't have, Corey, we don't have any money set aside for window replacement in this year's budget.
Correct. Just the, call it the routine maintenance. We have maintenance dollars, but nothing related to a project with the windows.
And I guess I say that by telling the board that, you know, we are going to have big numbers come up and we need to be prepared for that, as well as for everything we're expecting that we see before us in this budget.
Well, Hazen has a pretty good budget line item for town hall, depot, police, station 1 and 2, cruise wreck. I mean, there's a line item in there of the 8 or 9 different structures we have. He may have to move them around back and forth, depending on the necessary repairs and stuff like that. But this is dutifully better than we've done in the past. And I think that any small encounters, we should be all right. The good news is the community center is under the tourism fund, but yeah, under the facilities maintenance, there's that whole building maintenance and repair. And there's probably, Hazen, guess if I'm wrong, probably about $125,000, maybe $150,000 on sort of a revolving account from that standpoint for maintenance and repair.
But there are a lot of buildings in that, and then things come up like new air and ventilation and replacing the lights. And I mean, you know, we spend that money regularly.
And Albert's supposed to be on top of creating that plan and having a plan. It's something we can forecast out a little bit further, and hopefully we can make better use of that.
I mean, I just noticed the windows come to mind just because that's something when school was in, I walked past every day and noticed, but there were a lot of windows and a lot of wood. You know, it's going to be a big project.
I think the one that's given me heart palpitations as an elected official is HVAC. The cost of that stuff is just, holy cow, are we buying an airport or an air conditioner? I mean, it's, you know, really high dollar stuff.
Well, we spent 57, somebody correct me, 57 on the air conditioner here. And the air conditioner we put in here is for half of the upstairs. So the air conditioner that we put in for 57,000, CJ, is that a number that's right? So that replaced 50% of the HVA here in town. However, we are counting on a significant savings in electricity this year as a result of those new, and it made me think about, could we make another pitch on a cost benefit standpoint and spin it like, okay, if we spend this 57,000 now, can we get a return in 7 years? And that may be possible, but I'm not prepared to make that pitch to the board tonight.
But the rates don't stop going up either. You know?
All right, so I think it's what's the will of the board? I don't know if are there any department heads that feel compelled to tell their story to the board that you haven't had a chance to say? And if you'd like to do that, I guess what I'm hearing, Mayor, from you is have at it. Otherwise, we'll find the money in our budget. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, that's fair. Again, speaking only for myself, I think the downtown cameras and the hardening of our police department are very important, and we should not cut those items if any way possible. I would look elsewhere from my perspective, and I see Commissioner McCool nodding his head, and I think some others believe the same way. So I was talking to Ken earlier in the week, and I said, if those cameras catch even one, terrible criminal, then they've been well worth $80,000 or whatever. So if that stops somebody from getting maimed or injured or murdered or raped or whatever in our community, then that would be money well spent. And I would like to see those cameras be put up as soon as possible. And I also think it's very important that we harden our police department. We have what you've described essentially as a shell building. That's really scary. I mean, to think with some of the crazy people we have out that could just drive a truck or something into our police department, that's a terrible prospect. I think we need to get some bollards up and get that thing hardened so that it's a little harder to harm. Got to protect the guys that are inside there and gals.
When you have your internal conversation, are you going to come back to us and show us what each department kind of comes up with? Or is that going to be a decision made within, and then we just kind of say, okay, that looks good?
It's preference of the board. So what we would do before at the public hearing, we'd figure out a way to balance the budget without an appropriation from the fund balance and without hitting the cameras or the PD hardening, and just bring that back in a document, and we could lift up at that time what actions we're proposing for you guys to consider at the public hearing. You wouldn't adopt the budget. And Lori, is this current law doesn't allow us to adopt the budget the same night as the public hearing for the budget ordinance?
That is correct. You have to wait for 24 hours to get comments, and we have it scheduled for adoption at the first June meeting.
I guess personally, I would like to see what each department, when you have your conversations, each department comes and says, okay, we could back off on this a little bit. I would like to see that before we get into that meeting. I would be more comfortable with that.
Well, I'll tell you, we already scraped the departments once. I mean, they all know what they've been through. So, but we're happy to do that.
Can that be presented at a work session prior to the regular meeting that would allow for some discussion before it is presented at the public hearing?
That would be preferable. Speaking for myself, I think that'd be a good idea. Seeing some nods.
Yeah. That'd be good.
Public hearing's next Tuesday night.
But a work session at 5:30 and then the regular board meeting.
We could do that.
I mean, I don't even, to me, it doesn't matter if it's in an email. If we get a worksheet saying, okay, before we even came to this meeting tonight, Parks and Rec cut out the new equipment for Rice Road, and the police department cut out a new cruiser, and then the next cuts on the budget are, after this workshop, were I don't even know where you would get where else you would cut, but does that make sense? Because you seem like you want, Hazen, you seem like you want us to know what the departments have already cut. You've asked if they want to present, is that?
Let me just give you a quick example. Like in fire department, we're running this system where we're paying volunteers and not volunteers, but they're getting paid $100 a shift, and we're competing against Hemby Bridge, who's paying their guys $14 or $15 an hour. It's just a model that's not going to work. It's somehow it's working right now, and I give credit to great leadership in Chief Kinneberg, but I can't imagine many chiefs can pull this off and kind of keep cobbling this together. That's just an example of like this. No.
Well, I would like to know that information then. I mean, I guess you don't know what you don't know, right? And then asking Chief Kinneberg to come back and cut out something else seems like, man, they're really taking a hit. So.
Okay, well, I will jump in. Nope, nobody else did, so I will. You mentioned the MAPS study. They recommended an engineer's rank. That works really good for 6 people, 6 senior firefighters within the organization. So we need career development. We need advancement. We need at least 4 drivers a day, but the engineer rank only gives us 2 because of the apparatus we have. So we've put together the advanced certification program that helps 18 firefighters earn up to 5% more for about 350 hours worth of work on their time. It mirrors the police department's advanced law enforcement certification program. But that money came from moving money around within my budget already. So it got cut out. I argued with Hazen. He put it back in, but I'm still no further ahead. The volunteer stipend program, the mayor's right. People who make $100 an hour are not volunteers, but we use the term volunteers because 60% of our employee population are volunteers. They don't work directly for the town. And we run a very good apprenticeship program. We train them, we get about 3 years out of them, and then they realize there's life beyond Matthews, and we can't compete unless we can convert to a part-time program for those folks. And the last part is we got great leadership, but I need some help. We need a deputy chief. We had a deputy chief when we only had 8 career firefighters. Now we have 24 on 3 shifts, 24 hours a day, and I need a day off. There, I've said my piece. We can't do all this for 26 cents. My budget is $89,000 lighter than it was in FY20 right now.
So pardon me if I get the language wrong. I'm sorry if I get the language wrong because I didn't take notes, but you were saying you need more, not engineers, is that?
I need more people that can drive trucks.
Okay.
$1 million pieces of apparatus.
And when you're talking about that, and not having a deputy chief.
There's a lot of things we need. Right now, I'm going to settle for the advanced certification program, but we can't keep kicking the can down the road when you're dealing with an organization that has over 100 people in it. This is not a sleepy little department.
I guess for me, and this is probably a lot of my newness, attacking the budget and really looking for things that are a priority to me. I don't understand that organizational work. And I know I've asked you about it before, but how do we go into a budget and hear those frustrations? And I know that this is what we're talking about, you guys dealing with internally, but I feel like Matthews is a great place. And we're always looking for ways to increase its greatness, by doing things like having more festivals and having more fun activities. And those are wonderful. But when you're paring back and pulling back the budget to really the bare bones, to me, that means investing in our first responders, pulling back on the festivals, with apologies to Corey. The things that make Matthews affordable are our parks, our programs through the library, which is a county function. But we're all looking for a safe place to live with roads that are good to travel on. The bells and whistles are all, for me, extraneous. We try and leave town for Matthews Alive. So I know Matthews Alive is an establishment for the town, but for somebody who's lived here 40 years, 42 years, there's things that go above and beyond to make Matthews great. You know, what can we do to still enjoy the extra stuff, but, you know, redirect money to the backbone of what Matthews is.
Commissioner Miller, you've waited patiently, sir.
I'm not sure what I was gonna say. I'll skip it.
Okay.
So in my mind, when you guys said, look, let's fund the raises at the mid-year point, that saves of the $238,000 nut, that chips off a lot of it. So in my mind, it's okay, how do we find the rest of the money? I do want to look at revenues, right? I want to look at revenues again to see if there's things we can scrape. I do not want to go back to the departments and say, give me $20,000 a piece, because I know they've already done that. And so, the other thing I would say in this, and it's always a very difficult balancing act, but hearing Chief Kinneberg, one of the things, and that's advanced certification would stay in the budget, right? Because I'm not going to say, well, we can balance the budget with that $40,000 or the stratified policing model, whatever that number, somewhere around 45 or 44. Those two things would stay in there, and we'd need to find that $80,000 somewhere else. But I just want to tell you guys, as the board, raises are very important a part of keeping our employees. And that's what makes the town great. It's, at least, let me just leave it at that. So, but we've got clear direction. And I think the light at the end of that tunnel is, okay, if things are good January 1st, the board is willing to consider holding employees harmless back to July 1st. Now, how that gets divvied up, as Commissioner Garner's mentioned, that's something the board can decide, but that door is still open. That door is not closed. And so we'll bring you a balanced budget, and we can have a 5:30 work session, or I can send you guys the information of how we closed the fund balance appropriation gap. It's really whatever the pleasure of the board is.
Let's have a 5:30 so we can discuss it. Be my preference. Commissioner Miller, did you remember what you were?
Yes, thank you. On the topic of bollards, I've put those in, or I pay people to put those in. I'm sure Commissioner Urban does the same thing. They're not that expensive. Have we quoted those out around the police station?
Oh, that's what you're saying. Chief Pennington, do you know what the plan was to do that?
Yes, we did. Just bear with me a second. So
Yeah, I know it was a surprise. Sorry, Chief.
no, that's okay. Just had to get to the right tab. So we did only contact one, so I could get a rough estimate of what it would be to put these things in, and they are 6-inch steel bollards with decorative sleeves on top, so that we're not just having a concrete or a steel beam sitting in front of the police station. And they're about $1,375 a piece. That's installed. Total cost is about $44,000.
All right, I would suggest we quote that out. John Urban and I put those in. I don't have a real number, but it's not that complicated, honestly. And on the topic of camera work, security cameras, I put those in as well. Have we quoted that out 3 ways?
We've quoted it out a couple of different ways. We're looking at different standards. The push I got, or at least the information I got from the board, was our requirement, or our request, I guess, is to include LPRs, license plate readers. Those license plate reader software that OCR, optical character recognition software, allows us to capture the not only the images of individuals in the downtown area, or at least our feeder streets coming into the downtown, but it also allows us to capture the LPR data. That one quote we were looking at was about 80,000, but that includes install, relay switches, and also mass storage back here at the police department. So that was the first quote. Where we're at, where we end on that, that's kind of once we start, or if either put it out for a request or we start getting additionals.
I think the LPR is one of the things that makes it really worthwhile to me.
I agree, but they're LPRs are a unique individual camera. You put them down low so that they can see the license plate or the tag, as they call it in the South, et cetera, but they're not, it's not the standard camera price when, you know, you're in a field or a backyard or a side yard or a driveway. LPRs are a higher cost because of the resolution for their ability to read a license plate. And I would just urge us to make sure we price quote that out as well for savings. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a standard practice. 3 bids is standard practice.
Thank you.
All right, Hazen.
That's all on this side.
So I
So
want to
the marching orders.
thank everybody for your participation, and please be open-minded, as I'm sure town manager and staff will come back with maybe some creative solutions to this. And let's also remember that if the tide does turn, that we'll make good on our promise to consider the back pay to make our employees whole, as if we were so certain that we had the money right now. I think that's important, and maybe that's a message we can pass along to our employees, that, you know, in an abundance of caution, we're being very careful right now with the town's funds, but should the tide turn, we're gonna look out for you, and certainly gonna look at it anyway on January 1st. So
Thank you,
maybe
Mayor.
the 2nd, maybe not the 1st. Anybody have any final comments, questions?
I hope Matthews can open again.
Yes, we're all very hopeful. Okay,
We appreciate everybody's time.
thank you. Good night.
Good night. Motion to adjourn.
Peace.